Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Got a few things of housekeeping and just news before we dive into today's show with Paris Williams, which I really loved. Before we get to that, just a couple things. First is Jake Holland, who I had on the show quite a while back. He's been doing these incredible combo flying and summit assaults all over the Alps, but also in Pakistan. Done some pretty neat things with Antoine Girard and Aaron Duragati. And on the show, back when we recorded it, he mentioned his film that was just getting going in the festivals, The Magic of Freedom. And this documents their journeys over in Pakistan. You probably saw the highlight of it in Cross Country Magazine's newsletter this week. But it is out. Go to YouTube, just Google Magic of Freedom, Jake Holland, and you can check it out. It shows in descriptive detail how they're doing that, getting rid of these heinous, multi-day walk-ins to climb big peaks and just flying out of Karimabad and putting on their skis in the air and landing up tall and banging it out and getting back for dinner. So pretty cool use of our wings and really pushing the sport in an awesome direction. So check that out. The next thing I want to talk about was just subscribers. One, really want to thank you all. Just realized recently we're closing in on almost 3 million downloads since we started this madness, this mayhem back in 2014. So we're 250 shows in and a whole bunch of bonus content, and I love every second of it. It's a lot of work, and there's a lot of costs behind the scenes. And so for those of you who subscribe and support the show in whatever way you can, also just through buying stuff on the website, through books or swag or XC Tracer videos, whatever, I just really appreciate you. Usually I say this stuff at the end of every show. You've probably heard that a bunch of times, but I wanted to put it out here at the front. It's been an amazing journey, and we can't do it without you. It will remain ad-free. You get asked all the time to put ads in the front of these shows, as you hear on most podcasts. I can't stand those myself. I think that's one of the main things that's wrong with our digital world. So you're never going to hear any ads, and it will always be free forever. And that's if you can support it or not. If you can support it, I really appreciate it. All we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And the best way to do that is if you go to our website, cloudbasedmayhem.com, you'll find the links to Patreon. That's the best way in terms of fees. You can also support it directly through the show, through the website. And you can just set it and forget it. But through Patreon, you get a discount if you just support it for a year. It's way less than a magazine subscription and hopefully worth a lot more. Many of you still are sending $1 or $2 or $3 per show through PayPal. And we've changed that on the website because the fees, especially if you're just giving $1 a show, which is great, that's all we ask for. PayPal gets 52 cents of that, and we get 48. So you're paying them more than you are the show. I'm assuming that's not what you want to do. I've reached out to all of you who are doing it still that way individually, but those emails are probably PayPal emails, or you're just not seeing them. So if you do support the show, if you could change your subscription, if you do it at the lower amounts, which is totally fine, that's great. But do it through Patreon or through the new setup on the website. So you can cancel your current subscription, resubscribe, and it just bills way less frequently. So there's a lot less fees. Or through Patreon, it's way less fees. So either one of those two platforms is great, but just change it so you're not sending literally $1 every 2 weeks, because PayPal gets more than we do. Those of you who can't support the show and want access to the bonus content, all you got to do is send me an email. No questions asked. I'll set you up with a lifetime account, and maybe someday you can. But just let me know. We don't put out enough bonus content, but there's quite a bit there, and I will promise to do more. In fact, we are going to have an Ask Me Anything episode coming up shortly. So if you've got any questions for me or anybody you've had on the show that you've listened to, just shoot me an email and I'll put that in the next Ask Me Anything show. But again, thank you. It's been a wild ride. Really appreciate it. And your support does make it possible. So I appreciate it in any way you can do it. Even just telling your friends to listen. My guest today is Paris Williams. Paris was described to me by our mutual friend Lisa Rosella as a Renaissance man, which we get into it a bit on the show. I think you'll get why as we get into it. He and I are the same age. He's been flying hang gliders his entire life, so that gives you an idea for how long time. In the show, we explore the multifaceted nature of flying and its psychological implications. We really hit the psychological side of things heavy and mental health side of this because Paris is a psychologist and he had a pretty dark childhood and struggled with his own mental health and found real solace in the skies and turned that into psychology and tries to bring that kind of solace to his patients. But he's had a lot of success in competing and talks about how to find flow and the balance between competition and enjoyment and the need to reconnect with the joy of flying. We explore the intricate balance between striving for success and enjoying the journey in flying, and how letting go of the desire for achievement often leads to better performance. I really latched onto this. I've seen this a lot in competitions, and we talk about that a lot. But sometimes the more you want, the less you get. And if you just let it go and enjoy the process, the results come. We delve into the intricacies and emotional risks of pursuing records and the personal growth that comes from flying one's own passion. We discuss the impact of personal struggles on professional life, particularly in the context of mental health and grief. And while we got into this, I couldn't help but ask Paris for some advice on my own grief. We heard about the accident my very good friend Terry O'Connor had in the mountains about a year ago in an avalanche. And that's been a real struggle for me. So I asked him what I could be doing to help that healing. And so he talks about that, navigating grief and trauma and letting the natural healing process happen. I got a ton out of this. Paris is really articulate and fascinating. There's a real profound joy and love for the sport. He's just an endlessly fascinating individual. I think you will enjoy it. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the show. Cheers. Paris, as usual, this has taken a long time to coordinate. I say that with all of my guests, but thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for your patience, and thanks for coming on the show. It's good to see you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin.
So Lisa Rosella, a good friend of both of ours, she often does the weather for our comps that I run down in Utah, in your neck of the woods. She called you the Renaissance man. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I've had lots and lots of different interests and passions in my life. I assume that's what she's talking about. So both in the recreational realms and also in the academic realms, and yeah, lots of different areas.
Okay. You're a teacher in academics, or what do you do in academics?
So I have a PhD in psychology, and I'm actually working as a psychologist, but most of my work is teaching. So I do see some clients, and I work with some families and couples and individuals, but most of the work I do is supervising other health professionals and running trauma training. So I run trainings. Well, I actually have two different kinds of trainings. One is trauma. So teaching people how to work with trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, that kind of thing, other professionals. And then ecotherapy, which is about using the outdoors therapeutically.
Oh, wow.
So those are that's my livelihood. And that has been my livelihood for, I got licensed about 14 years ago. So, but I've been kind of in this field for about 20 years. Okay,
so very general question. What's wrong with us as pilots?
I'm still trying to figure.
Why do we pursue this sport?
Still trying to figure that one out. No.
No easy answer, huh?
No easy answer, but I think there's some commonalities. Obviously, most of us love the outdoors, no doubt. I mean, speaking for myself, I know I got into one of the things that got me into flying was I had a pretty rough childhood and was very jealous of the birds. I just remember growing up as a kid and looking at the red tails and the vultures circling overhead and just longing to join them. And then I made that a reality. And so I know in a way, in some ways, I'm not alone. I mean, certainly, I don't know what the percentage is, but certainly some of us to get in the sport, there is a desire to leave the ground in that way. But yeah, I don't want to generalize too much.
Because we are a weird bunch. I mean,
yeah, very eccentric.
Truly, you know, we were talking before we started recording. You've done a lot of competition flying, and just recently again. But so we'll get into that. But it's, you know, we always talk about when we're at competition that, you know, what a group of kooks, a pretty wide ranging group, a lot of engineers.
Yeah, a real eccentric bunch for sure, and lots of engineers. Yeah, and lots of diversity, no doubt.
Sure.
And people, I mean, generally, I think what you find are people who just really love to celebrate life. Like, you know, they're willing to risk their lives to celebrate life, right? To really deeply and fully enjoy this thing we call life, and you know, and soaring over the mountains and circling up high into the sky, and you know, so that's the commonality, I would say. It's that deep love of the natural world and the stimulation of really pushing ourselves to the limits in these ways.
How long have you been doing it?
I did my first flight at age 14, so I'm 52 now. So does that make it?
Same age.
Yeah. Okay. So if I do the math, 38 years ago, that was just off a training hill. My mom had a boyfriend. Long story, but I wasn't raised by my mom, but I was visiting her, and she had a boyfriend who had bought an old Standard, like from a garage sale, and we went out to none of us knew what we were doing. I was 14 and he was, I think, 25. And we just did a bunch of flights off this hill. I don't even think we knew about the wind direction and all of that. And I managed to fly like a dozen times before I sprained my ankle really badly. And that was 14, but then I didn't really get into it till I was 17. So 17,
where
I started
was
teaching at 18. So that was all Northern California.
Okay. So you were where the birth of it was. Let me do some math here real quick. 38 years. Yeah, I mean, so it was happening as a sport, but real new.
Yeah, this would have been like 86. Yeah, 1986. That's right. They're just starting to get out of the really scary, dangerous hang gliders at this point. Although the one I was, in that example I just gave, that was a scary, dangerous hang glider, but they were starting to get a lot safer at that point. They were having, getting things like luff lines and tip stabilizers. Basically, the original hang gliders would go into luff dives. You'd pull the bar in to get speed, and then you would end up in a vertical dive and you couldn't get out of it. It's called a luff dive, and quite a few people died that way. And so at this point, by the mid 80s, they had actually solved that for the most part, that problem. So it was getting quite a bit safer.
And you started instructing pretty quick. You just said in 4 years, when you were 18, you started instructing?
Yeah, so it was actually, there was that one day at age 14, and then I didn't fly at all. I started taking lessons at 17 up in Mount Shasta, it's in Northern California. And I was super passionate and got my intermediate rating and went down to Monterey area and started teaching. So I was 18 now. So I started, basically they have sand dunes there. And so just taking people off the sand dunes. And then a year later, ended up in Kitty Hawk Kites, North Carolina, doing tandems. So I ended up doing lots and lots of tandem flying for them and carried on teaching for lots of different schools over the years. From then, and had my own school in Salt Lake. Started my very first school that I owned with a colleague, Tom Webster. We started in Salt Lake City in 94. I'm pretty sure.
At the point
of the mountain. That's right. Yeah. sky's edge hang gliding. We weren't very successful. We had a hard time marketing. It was before the internet, and
Yeah.
but we got a few students through anyway.
Huh. And this whole time, were you in this period of life? Was this life flying, or were you still pretty heavy involved in academics and your career?
No, this was all hang. So my whole career was flying up until it was kind of when I turned about in my early 30s that I made a kind of radical shift into something different. But up until my early 30s, I just lived, ate, breathed, flying. That's pretty much, that was my whole passion. And traveling, a fair bit of traveling. But I had, there was a famous author, Richard Bach, who wrote stories about traveling around with his biplane, taking people for rides. And so I was really inspired. So I actually did that for a number of years. I got a van, I got my tandem hang glider, and I went, Telluride and Aspen, and I went to Mexico and Central America, and I was just taking people hang gliding. And I did that for off and on for a number of years, kind of through my kind of early mid-20s. And just did lots of work for almost every major school in the country at one point or another. And also worked for a couple of different manufacturers. So I worked for Altair, John Heine and Altair here in Salt Lake City in the mid-late 90s. One of they had the Predator hang glider, which was at the time it was the best going king post glider at the time, and then the topless gliders showed up, and then the Predators couldn't quite, with that king post, couldn't quite keep up, and then they ended up, for a few reasons, but they ended up going out of business, sort of early 2000.
I had John on the show not too long ago, and I was out at his shop in near Elsinore, and I mean, he must have 50 hang gliders in that thing. It was amazing. It was impressive.
Yeah,
all his machine equipment and machine shop stuff. It was very cool.
Yeah, he's very inspiring. Definitely one of my mentors. I was in those early days, the early 90s. I was just all about aerobatics. I wasn't really into it, competitively at that point. I just loved going as fast as I could and getting upside down as much as I possibly could. So, and I was just used the point of the mountain was great for that. So I spent lots of time at the point of the mountain and elsewhere. And John is I think probably many of your listeners know, very well-known aerobatic pilot. And so he helped me a lot. And I ended up actually in 98, I ended up winning the Telluride kind of aerobatic world championships. I dabbled in competition for that year, but then I ended up getting into, it only lasted that year really. And then I got into cross-country racing after that.
So your first passion with flying was aerobatics?
Was aerobatic. Yeah. So I wasn't doing any real cross country. I mean, I enjoy thermaling and stuff, but yeah, it was for me, it was all about the thrill of combination of, the thrill of racing and getting upside down, but also the sense of mastery of, just trying more and more advanced maneuvers. And I even kind of developed a couple maneuvers myself, almost killed myself in that process of doing that. But, so there was quite a shift for me. I don't know, maybe it was just getting older and recognizing my mortality. I'm not sure. Something happened and I
was it those close calls maybe?
I did have a few close calls. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I enjoyed, so speaking as a psychologist, I was, going back, I had a pretty rough childhood, a lot of really difficult things happened. And I was pretty depressed, really. In hindsight, I was pretty depressed in my 20s. And the one time that I wasn't depressed was when I was in the sky. And, but it almost became like an addiction for me. It's like I had to be on the edge of death to almost like pull myself out of the depression and feel, the excitement and the rush would keep me feeling kind of high and feeling good. And so I definitely got into this thing where I was pushing myself. Like I wanted to, what was it like to come out of a loop at 10 feet or at 2 feet or, like just getting crazier and crazier basically. And, I had a couple times that were pretty close. I never did pile in, but I certainly had a couple of pretty close calls. And I had a lot of people complaining, a lot of other pilots telling me I had to stop. I was going to kill myself and you're going to jeopardize the site. And so I was a bit of a rebel that way. And, I actually had a dream. It's interesting. I wasn't making friends. A lot of people upset with me and my behavior around the way I was flying. And I had a dream where I was watching myself do this kind of crazy stuff, at the point of the mountain. And it was just like, I was terrified watching myself. I'm like, what are you doing? You're going to kill yourself. And somehow I kind of woke up. I was like, yeah, I am going to kill myself. Like I could tell, by pushing myself harder, eventually I'm going to find my limit, right? And it's going to probably be death or being seriously maimed. And so that it did shift. Something really shifted for me. And I kind of stepped out of the addiction to the adrenaline and, started enjoying other aspects. I still kept doing aerobatics, but it was no longer about scaring myself and trying to keep that adrenaline rush going. It became more about just mastery, like just style and mastery. And I kind of got out of having to do just really crazy stuff like I had for a few years, and which is great. I don't think I would have survived much longer in hindsight if I carried that attitude going.
God, nice time to have a dream.
I know.
I think there's a lot of people listening going, why didn't I get to have that dream?
Yeah, so man, just stepping outside of myself and seeing myself and just seeing the madness of what I was actually doing was, yeah. So that was important, and that was a shift. And then it ultimately led me to focusing more on the kind of mastery of mastering, the spins and rollovers and climb overs and wing overs and loops, all the different maneuvers we do and the hang glider. And then that just felt a lot more wholesome.
I don't have any knowledge or background of psychology other than what I took in a community school at some point. So I was ski racing, so school was quite unorthodox for me. And, but so anyway, that's all I have as a background, but this isn't a show about mental health, but it does seem like mental health is a subject that comes up quite a bit in this sport. And, we use the analogies of when you're high, when you're low, yeah. All the time. But we certainly see a lot of people in the sport struggling with mental health and depression and anxiety, these kind of things. You mentioned it. How did you come out of the hard, difficult childhood, and move on, or were you able to move on from the escapism of the sport to better mental health?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was kind of a double-edged sword, the sport. On one hand, I totally attribute the sport to pulling me out of like a really dark hole that I was in many ways. Like it really gave me, I think if I didn't get into hang gliding, I would have got into, drug addiction, most likely. I was kind of heading a little bit down that path, drinking too much and dabbling in some other substances are a bit too much. And flying gave me a way to, have some light, some brightness, some joy without having to poison myself, drugs and alcohol. So that was, on one hand, that was, I think, really, really great. I really appreciate that. And it also gave me a way to really connect with the natural world, just generally having that, getting outside and connecting with my own body and that kind of sense of, mind over matter, that mastery, that self-discipline that goes with that. So all those factors were huge. Like, I think they probably saved my life. I mean, in many ways. I mean, I would have become an addict, or who knows, I might have even got, I was suicidal at times. And so I definitely attribute that. And I see that in my own work now, like for people who are in a really dark hole, if you can find a way to connect them to the outdoors, it doesn't have to be flying, but, something that they're passionate about that's also outside. There's just something naturally healing about getting outside and getting under the sun and the wind and connecting with our fellow earthlings and connecting with your own body and mastering your own body and your, pushing your limits in a healthy way. All these things are just so good for mental health, I think. But ultimately it was like a stepping stone. And then it was a bit, you might say in my life, it was a bit like kicking the can down the field. Like it definitely helped a lot, but there was still stuff from my past that wasn't really properly resolved. And I ended up getting into mindfulness meditation in my late 20s. I was kind of bummed. I was in this state, a little bit depressed. And somebody said, why don't you try this 10-day mindfulness meditation retreat? I was like, I don't know, sitting there for 10 days, looking at your breath. I mean, I didn't really get it, but I did it. And it really, like, all that, so much of that stuff I was holding actually came out. Like I could feel it sort
Wow.
of coming out, and actually I felt so much better. And it was quite interesting. If you look at it in the context of my hang gliding career, I was just starting to get into kind of cross country racing in my late 20s. And I was, as most of us do who get into cross country racing, you're often you're like your own worst enemy. You're wrestling with our own, ego. Oh, I got to win. We get, or oh no, I'm getting low. I'm going to bomb out. I'm going to look like a real ass. Or, we get totally caught up in all of this, and it's easy to do. And that takes us away. It takes us out of the moment, right? In order to fly really well, you want to be super present. You want to be able to see, the birds circling and the clouds forming and the different, be able to keep track of the different wind layers and lift layers, et cetera, et cetera. And the more you're obsessed with that trophy or, not bombing out, whatever, you get into all the emotional, or you might even say egotistical sort of aspect of it. It takes us out of that. And so I did this retreat, and it was like this kind of real life-changing experience on the psychological level. But then when I went back to competition, two things happened. I was more present. I just seemed to not, I just wasn't as obsessed with all that kind of more ego stuff. I was just kind of able to just enjoy the flying more. I was more present. And so I didn't, in some ways I had less of the eye of the tiger. Like I didn't have to win. I could just go and enjoy myself, but just be present and do my best. And I suddenly started doing so much better. Like I quickly, I actually won the U.S. Nationals, not long after that, and won quite a few more over the next few years. And yeah, so those it ended up being a personal healing on one level. And on the other level, it actually really accelerated my own flying abilities.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then I'll just say one more thing. I learned about the Chicago Bulls. I don't know if you know the story about.
Oh, yeah.
And how actually, yeah, and the coach brought mindfulness practice into the team, and that played a huge role in their sudden acceleration, to excellence, you might say. So, yeah, so becoming more present, being able to work with my own emotions more skillfully was like a huge contributor to, actually flying much better.
Interesting. Would you say that you were just able to find and stay in flow state better?
Absolutely, yeah.
Training?
Yeah, because that's basically what mindfulness training is. It's really just about presence. Like when you do something like that, you realize the natural mind is actually really quite wild. Like it doesn't like to be present. It's jumping, thinking about the past, future, here, there. It's all over the place, right? And a few moments presence, and then it's off again. And when you do that training, it's like going to the gym for your mind. You actually you definitely get better at being able to just be more present and more at peace with what, you're not so obsessed with worrying about doing, like striving after winning or worrying about losing. That stuff just becomes weaker, and you can just be more present. And so, yeah, so they're muscles basically. You can cultivate those capacities with that kind of practice. And then it definitely bleeds over into, so if your aspiration is to excel in flying, whether it's competition or going, maybe going for personal bests or whatever it might be, the more you can be present and tame your own, your wild mind and your own emotions, then certainly you're going to do better.
How did you transition from the silent retreat when you got that out of it? How did that manifest in your flying? Was it automatic because you had just done this and then you realized, oh wait, or were you literally bringing something? Were you using mantras, or did you?
Right. Yeah, it was kind of automatic. It was almost even a little surprising. It was like, oh, I'm actually flying a lot better. Like, well, and it was then it was clear why. So part of it was automatic in that way. It was like, imagine going to the gym and getting certain strengths, and then you go and you do a sport that you've been doing a while, but suddenly you find it's easier because you're actually stronger now. It was like that. It was like, oh, this is actually a lot easier now because my mind is stronger in certain ways. And also I had the skill. So in the methods I did, it wasn't mantras. It was just really putting your attention on your breath, or whenever your mind starts to get a little bit wild, you just bring it back to like your breath or sensations in your body, and that use that as a kind of an anchor to keep bringing yourself back to the present. So when you start, for example, and so I was doing that intentionally, like I'm flying, and as you do, you're doing a race and you get low, it happens, and you start thinking, oh shit, I'm gonna bomb out here. And then it's easy to start obsessing and worrying about that. And then that actually creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now you're so worried about that, you actually land. And instead it's like, nope, back to my breath and then back to, I just need to be present, forget about all that. I've still got 500 feet, look around. There's something here. What's the wind doing? Is there some little 3-dimensional feature that I could look for? Maybe there's a little bird, so as you get lower, the birds become more apparent. And so the more you're able to stay present, the more you're able to notice all that stuff. And so I would do that intentionally, like just keep using my breath as a kind of anchor whenever my mind starts to drift and get a little bit wild.
My nemesis is the last 10% of the race. I've started to get a better handle on this, but if I start thinking I'm in position, I'm going to win this one, that's the death of me.
Exactly. That's exactly
as soon as
right.
I start thinking, it's time to break. I've got these guys. Oh man, that's
because now you're imagining the podium. You're imagining,
exactly.
And you're not.
I've got
you're
the
not
score. I've got the
present.
score. Start thinking about the next day. I just one more of this, and I've got this one.
And now you're not present. That's
not
right.
present.
That's right. So those are the extremes where we get lost. Either you're doing worse than you hope for, you're getting lower, and then you start, oh no, I'm going to blow it. I'm going to look like a fool. I'm going to have this terrible score, blah, blah, blah. Or you're doing really good, and you're like, oh, this is great. I'm going to be the hero of the day, blah, blah, blah. Either extreme is going to take you out of the present and going to hurt you, right? You're going to end up, So
it seems to me,
it's zero.
Expectation is the death of good flying. It seems like, last year at the Monarca, I've been going to the Monarca for a long time, and I'd gotten close and close and close. And really the year before, I just gave it away. Same exact. I mean, I was so in position and just gave it away. So last year finally won it, and just had the mantras. I'd gotten some help from Cody Matank. He lives down by you. He was there at the point, and we'd done some work together, and it was beautiful. I didn't even need to fly the last day. I got it. So of course this year I went down, I got to defend my title. That was what was in my head. And that's just the worst. I had the worst comp. I mean, it was all awful. It was fun. It was a wonderful week, as it always is in VIA, but holy cow, I couldn't get out of my own way.
Racing yourself to the ground, that kind of thing.
Oh God, just dumb. Just constantly going, I'm smarter. Rather than no discipline, not only am I going to win, I'm going to crush. And I didn't do either of those.
That's
things.
right. And every moment you're thinking about the future, about the win, you're not thinking about the present, right? That's right.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah.
So that's totally. I mean, I attribute that more than anything to succeeding, just really being present.
Were there, as the years went by and you stacked up some nice success, it sounds like a number of U.S. Nationals wins and world team memberships, that kind of thing. Were there, I'm sure there was, but was there times that would slip? Do you have a kind of a secret sauce to coming back to that kind of performance?
I've definitely had some slips. Yeah. Got a lot better, but it was basically falling back into those habitual patterns of losing presence, of letting my mind get wild, of getting fixated on the achievement rather than the, present. And so kind of catching, so I could come out of that a lot faster. So I didn't, the early days, I had a lot more where you get in that death spiral. You do bad, and then you feel like crap, and then you do worse, and then you race yourself to the ground. That whole, I think you probably know that death spiral. Most competition pilots know that.
You see, I'm nodding my head.
Yeah, that's right. Nodding your head. And so, but I was able to recognize getting sucked into that death spiral and how it just pulls you more and more out of the present moment, right? And you just end up all emotional, right? You're just like, this longing and this fear of failing and this longing for, success. And I was able to catch myself and go, okay, back to your breath, just what's happening right now. That's all that matters. This moment, all I have to do is just be here at this moment, fly the sky, forget about everything else. So I got a lot better at being able to do that. Not perfect, no doubt. We had my bad days.
We're talking about an interesting conundrum. This is a subject that comes up a lot on the show. We're humans, and we've created things like X contests and races and race to goal, and these are all performance based achievement, right? It's longer, better, bigger. When it comes to proximity flying, closer, the speed flying and wingsuit, it's not really that fun. The closest person to killing themselves is having the most fun, right? Yeah. But these are not, to my mind, very sustainable ways to enjoy this sport. It was interesting because you talked about kind of the beginning of your career was just this passion for flying. And then, but you had these mental health struggles, and then you go to racing, which to me is, God, if you're having trouble with mental health, and that could really destroy it. I mean, God, there's nothing worse than just pulverizing yourself at comps, and we're really talking about the ego, aren't we? But
yeah,
it's quite interesting that, nothing I'm saying is going to be a shock to anybody listening. We all struggle with this, is that, wouldn't it be great if the sport could just be like it is that first time forever? We all remember our first flight. It was just remarkable, and we didn't do anything. But it really does become you're kicking your helmet if you haven't gone more than 200K. You know what I mean? It just becomes this weird.
Can't get no satisfaction, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just our desire for more is in everything. I mean, driving a car. I mean, just life. It's interesting how we're geared as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of looking at my own life, that it was interesting how those two coincided. The settling, the reducing of that, that striving that you're describing, the striving for more and more and better. As that got less, I ironically started doing better. Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
And I definitely noticed that inverse correlation between those two. Like the harder, I really got to win this, I got to defend my title. The stronger that is, guaranteed, the worse I'm going to do, like almost guaranteed. And the more I'm like, hey, this is great. I'm with my flying mates here, and we got this amazing weather, and we're just crossing over this beautiful territory. The better I do, it's like so kind of letting that go and just, in a way that I think that intense, but on one hand, there's the conundrum because it's the striving which pulls you to do it in the first place. Right? So,
exactly.
So there's a balance. There's a balance there.
Right. We wouldn't even go compete if we had this totally figured out. We just wouldn't give a shit, would we?
That's right. Like, hey, I am like an enlightened monk here. I don't need to compete. I don't need any glorification. I don't need to prove anything to myself or anyone else. Right. But I think, like, for me, the transition ended up being, fun, just coming back to fun, and companionship. That's one of the things I actually really love about cross country racing is the companionship. Like, whoever you're with is your best friend, even if you don't know the person. It's like, okay, well, here we are, and I've got a couple wings around me. Well, they're my mates right now. They're my companions. Let's work together. And I love that. We're all going to the same place, and you're totally helping each other. And and so for me, when I get into that remembering that that's what it's all about, getting with your friends, pushing your limits, and, enjoying that sense of self-mastery and discipline, and pushing those limits. And then whatever the outcome is the outcome is whatever it is. Like, try not to be too attached to that. I know it's easier said than done, but if you can remember, the most important thing is the fun of it. Like you say, the first time you flew, right? What is it? It's like, we're just so, like, they're talking about presence. You're just like, oh my God, the wind passed your face, and, the magic of just floating across the ground. And, can we come back to that? And if you stay in that space, ironically, I think you'll actually perform better. Like, it's by relegating your achievement to second before fun. Ironically, you often do better. It's certainly the case for me.
You mentioned again before we started recording that you had this period of pretty intense, a lot of comps. Sounds like, I don't know if it was intense, but you did a lot of comps, just flying, a lot of worlds flying, and then you've just come back to it after a big break. Is that right?
That's right. So there was a kind of a flurry from about so 98 was sort of, I did the aerobatic comps. Hadn't done any cross country yet, but then it was after that, I kind of, a couple things happened. I I sort of felt like I achieved what I wanted to. It's kind of like I felt kind of complete with aerobatics. Like it's not like I stopped completely, but I didn't feel like I needed to do any more comps or anything. And also, I was very poor, and I needed sponsorship, and it was very hard to get sponsorship for aerobatics. Whereas at that time, cross country racing, you could get sponsored. So, and I was getting more interested in the idea of that whole domain of cross country. So that's when I shifted. So from kind of 99 to 2005, I just really went for it. I did, kind of all the comps every year. I ended up getting sponsored first from Altair, and then from Wing, and then from Icaro, and then from Aero. So and then finally I did a little bit of boys at the end, but yeah, I went through all the major competitors, but, I was just absolutely loving it, enjoying it. But then it was kind of like 2000, it was actually around 2002 or 3. That's where I kind of had this, it was a kind of a mental breakdown, really. I mean, for lack of a better word. I had done that 10-day retreat. Things had really shifted for me. I was flying better, but at the same time, it was like, I found a sense of light at the end of the tunnel from a lot of darkness that I'd been through on a personal level. But at the same time, I realized there was something more. There's more that needed to be resolved. And it kind of all, I don't know, there's a perfect storm I won't really go into that happened in my life. And I ended up having to kind of deal with all that. And I ended up getting actually much more serious about the meditation, because that was the only thing I didn't really trust the mental health system. And it's the only thing that really, like, I trusted would help me to get through what was happening for me. A lot of depression, anxiety, and stuff like that. And then, and I managed to work through that, and it kind of came out the other side. And I guess my passion shifted. It wasn't that I lost passion in flying, but it was more that I wanted to help others like that. After having gone through that kind of dark night of the soul myself, I felt more inspired to want to help other people who were going through their own dark nights of the soul. So that was where my career took a turn. So I did keep competing off and on, and somehow I managed to keep it. Like every time I did a comp, I would usually often win or get on the podium, and somehow managed to maintain that. But the intensity of my competition after 2005 went way down. But I'd occasionally still do a team, get on the U.S. team. They'd always invite me back, and it's usually pretty easy to get onto it. And then I was in New Zealand for the last 10 years, and I kind of stopped flying altogether for about 6 years, just as I was really focused on other stuff. And then when I came back to the U.S., I thought, I really want to get back into this again. So then, I went and I did my first comp in a number of years at Florida last year. With the
that was when you won.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I mean, with that big of a gap and being away from it for so long and coming back and performing that well, was that, I often think that distance and getting away from something, you can often get better, because you're not doing it all the time. You gain perspective that's sometimes, I think, hard to get when you're doing it all the time. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand. Like beginner's mind, you're kind of coming at it with sort of beginner's mind. Yeah, it's a different perspective. It's true. Yeah, I felt I can resonate with that. Where I think, because I've seen it go both ways, where, you get people really great at, a good record of competition, obviously really good pilots. They get out of it for a while and they come back and they totally bomb, right? That's actually definitely been a thing in our sport. Not everyone, but that has happened, and it's really kind of frustrating. And but what I think, and I've kind of felt that tendency myself when I've taken a long break, you think you're the pilot you were, and you're not. It's been a number of years, and it's like you're trying to, again, you get totally achievement oriented. Okay, I gotta prove myself again. I was this kind of legend back then. I got to be a legend again. And then it kills you. Like, as you talked about your last call, as soon as you have that attitude, it's like the worst attitude you can have, right? Mm-hmm. It takes you out of the present, and you get all emotional. And so I definitely made, every time I took these breaks, I kind of knew that maybe it's my psychology training. I don't know, but I knew that was like bad. Like, don't do that. Like, don't get obsessed with winning. Just go have fun. And so I really made that like my mantra. My mantra was just have fun, just make goal. Even if you do it really slowly, just make it. Don't forget about trying to race. And kind of, trust that, as long as you do your best and don't try to really charge, that you'll know, you'll be able to fly efficient. And each time I was able to, like, I managed to do quite well that way. But I had to make the effort to not not get sucked into that. I have to win. I have to keep the title or get the title back. Or, it's really important not to go there. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So with this, coming back to it, you were down in New Zealand for 10 years, you said?
Yeah, about 10 years.
And this was in academia?
Yeah, I ended up, long story short, I in 2006, I married a New Zealand woman.
Oh.
And we ended up living in the U.S. for quite a while, but then her family was there and they were having a lot of problems and difficulties. So we ended up moving there. I wasn't really enjoying the U.S. politics much anyway and all of that. So I thought, I'll go try New Zealand out. And so but then after 10 years, a lot of combination of things happened. My parents getting older over here and just things fizzling out in our relationship. And just, I've really feeling the pull to come back home.
Were you in the South Island or North Island?
North Island for about 5 years, about half the time, and then the South Island for about that long.
But no flying. You weren't flying down there.
Very little. First few years a bit, and I just the only comps I basically did was just I'd fly over to Australia and they'd give me a light speed. The Moyes, the Moyes is over there in Australia, and then I did a couple of comps over there.
Okay.
And that was a lot of fun. So I ended up actually.
So you were staying kind of tuned up. I mean, you hadn't totally left school for 10 years. Okay.
Yeah, kind of. And then there was like the last 5 years before I moved back here last year. I almost didn't fly at all. I ended up getting really preoccupied with other projects. Huh. We bought some land and I was doing a ton of building work, landscaping and building and trying to kind of regenerating this land. And that ended up sort of taking up a lot of my passion and time. But I was really missing flying. I was feeling it. I was missing it. So it's nice to get back into it here.
Do you get that whole, I get this kind of almost, it's irrational, stupid fear. And I was just bouncing that between my ears. But maybe it was all the year, I did the X House for a long time. And so I was just kind of in this constant state of training during all those. And so now I get anxious when I'm not getting better. Does that make sense? If I'm not training, I don't know. I have this FOMO, I guess, of, when the super final just happened down in Colombia and I was going to go. And then at the last minute I pulled out because I'm not very excited about Roll the Neo anymore. So I pulled out, but I watched every day. It's just kind of silly. Anyway, my question is, do you, when you're working on the land, are you able to leave the flying behind?
Yeah, I mean, it was always the back of my mind or back of my heart, or where you want to put it, something was sort of missing because it just became such an important part of who I am and my identity and my, what gives me joy. And so it never really went away. Like I was always kind of, I'm really missing that. I'd like to do some flying. But I'd made these major commitments and it was kind of conflicting with being able to do that during those years. And so when I did come back here, it was definitely like, I'm going to get back into flying. Like I'm going to, and even actually take up paragliding. And so I did that a year ago to just kind of expand my horizons a little bit.
Oh, wow. Let's talk about that. So you're now flying paragliders as well. But they collapse, dude. Isn't that?
I know. I have not got over. I don't know if I'll ever get over that fear of that. Actually, maybe I shouldn't get over that fear. I suppose, but I only started a year ago. I mean, I'm like I just got my P3, and so I've got 35 hours. I did one SIV clinic, so anyway, I'm really new. But the reason I got into it was because I wanted to be able to hike and fly.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to hike and fly with a hang glider.
Right.
So that was really but now I'm torn because I love flying big desert air, big thermals, and I'm actually terrified of doing it in a paraglider. Like really? I'm still, I've already had a few collapses and like just even flying Inspiration Peak, not far from here, flying over the canyon and had a full collapse, 100% collapse over this canyon. And there was a moment of like, oh my God, I don't want to throw my parachute here. I'm looking down all these rocks and these canyons. And luckily it opened, within a couple of seconds. But still it was like, how do you get over that fear of your glider just suddenly out of the blue? It seemed like I suppose that's the thing is as you get better, it's less and less out of the blue, I suppose, but it still feels like it just happens out of the blue.
It also gets to where they just don't do that anymore. You get good enough that you just, you're still going to have it. You're still going to, especially in the air that we fly here in the Rockies, we're going to put it in a spot that you're going to take a whack. But
yeah,
I think they just become second nature. It's like your second skin, and you don't really, also, this is maybe not very good advice that I should as you get better and as you start flying hotter gliders, they're giving you a lot more feedback. Well, that's a good way to put it, I guess. But,
more feedback,
the two-liners just don't frontal and don't collapse like lower end gliders do. And at least they're certainly if they do, then of course things are worse. But, I just
less likely to in the first place.
Much less likely, especially if you're flying well. If you're paying attention, they just it just doesn't happen much anymore. I remember 10 years ago when I was flying ENCs and stuff, I was taking hits all the time. But I think that's a combination of things. It's the wing I'm flying, and I'm a better pilot. But
yeah, absolutely. The big risk I see, and I know friends of mine who went from hang gliding and paragliding and ended up getting quite badly hurt. A couple things. One, you forget. You don't have the same penetration into the wind. It's easy to forget that. And that's actually what happened when the collapse happened, I got back into this canyon, and I was just so many years on a hang glider. There was some wind, and I thought, I can still glide out. And I went to glide out. I was like, I'm barely penetrating, and I'm in this canyon, and this is not a good place to be. And so I actually let my hands go up on the brakes to get more speed. And then, of course, it made the glider less stable. It collapsed. So, it was pilot. In hindsight, it was really all pilot error. So I could totally see that. But part of it is getting used to the fact, A, I don't have the penetration that I'm used to. And B, the glider can collapse. Hang gliders don't collapse. Well, that's not 100% true. They can tumble, which fortunately is very rare. And if that's really bad when that happens. But you just kind of get used to not having to think about keeping your wing inflated. It's just, you don't get used to. So when you suddenly get on a wing that can collapse,
it seems like it's really a restructuring of the approach, right? And I'm not a hang glider, but I always hear that from hang gliders, but they collapse, and it's just in our world, we don't think about that much. Of course we do. They collapse, but I think it's probably a restructuring. I'm imagining of just margin and performance
and attention, right? You gotta donate a certain percentage of we're talking about presence to, is the wing inflated and keeping it inflated, right? And so when you fly a hang glider, that's not really, you're just not putting your attention there at all. So
right.
So that you have to kind of train yourself to have this constant 20 or whatever it is % of your attention on your wing stability. And I think that's probably a big part of the learning curve from hang gliding to paragliding, is doing that.
Sure.
Does that sound, would you agree with that? Or
totally. 100%. Jumping to a completely different, I just had a really neat experience out in the Sierras, flying in really, really strong wave. And we flew at night with night vision goggles. So this guy, Gordon out there, is just doing some amazing stuff. And we did a show on it, and there was an article on, but we, at one point we got pretty proper low, really deep in the Sierras. We'd done a northern leg up way past Reno. We were coming back down south, heading down towards Whitney, and now it's daylight. We can see, and we got what I would have considered really low, kind of dirty low and it was really strong wave. There was incredibly strong winds. Right. And, in my mind, we got to get the hell out of here, man. How are we going to possibly get to the runway? I know in a glider, you kind of want to land on a runway. And, for him, it was just, no, we got a lot of time. It's just a whole nother, and I'm sure, so there's a lot of that just between, hang gliders and paragliders. It's just restructuring. I know exactly probably where you were flying inspo back in that canyon. You just won't do that on a paraglider anymore. That's not a nice place to be. Get penetrate out of there.
And the big rocks make it a little bit gnarlier with the turbulence. Kind of
right. Yeah. Tough lessons. That always is a thing though. There's that, one of our very first shows, and my neighbor, Matt Beechner, we call him Farmer, he has this great story of flying out in the Sierras, on the main chain. So not over in the Whites, but the main chain in the Sierras, and, getting pretty dirty low and really bad air, and has a big collapse. And his recovery stories is fantastic, but it's that whole, we all always, you could just throw your reserve, but not in some places. So, some places you're looking down going, I don't think that's my safest option. That happens in the Alps a lot too. You're just looking down going, this is not a place to throw a reserve. Of course at some point you'd have to try
to survive.
Those are always mentally, that doesn't look good.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm my plan is I don't want to hurt or maim myself. I love the idea of being bilingual. But I'm going to take it easy. I'm not going to do middle of July, middle day conditions for at least a couple of years, I'd say. I'm going to just go back to my hangy for that. And so this year I'm looking forward to trying to maybe, do some long, maybe even try to set some records or something here in Utah with a hang glider.
Yeah.
So,
Excellent.
See how that goes. Yeah.
We're the same age. But you've been in this a lot longer than I have. I'm 25 years, I guess, or so now, but, no, that's not right. 20 years, a little over 20 years. So you've been in twice the length that I have, but how have things changed for you because of age in your approach to the sport?
Yeah, I think, you recognize your mortality a little bit more, I think, and the fragility of your body. I just remember in my 20s, it wasn't even a consideration hardly, my mortality. A little bit of a consideration, but not as much as it probably should have been. I think there's a lot of luck that I survived that. But, just generally a lot more aware of, just more conservative in that regard, like not pushing it and feel like I have other things to live for. I guess back then too, there was a time where I just really didn't have anything else to live for. Like it was that was my whole life. And so if I die, who cares? Die doing what I love. Now it's like, there's other things I actually do want to live for. So that's a big shift. And the priorities, and again, the stimulation isn't like, at that age, there was that kind of high I was looking for all the time. And, I know obviously people my age still chasing that, but I don't chase that intense stimulation. I don't need the big adrenaline rushes like I used to. It's, I find the fun is a little bit more, more of a relaxed kind of fun, just enjoying the beauty, pushing the limits. Absolutely. But I don't need to scare myself all the time. That isn't really something I try to do anymore. So those are probably the biggest changes I've noticed.
You mentioned maybe going after some records and stuff this summer. Love that. That's fantastic. What would your gear be? What do you flying these days? And the audience, obviously not many of them are going to be very familiar with Utah. So let's not get too specific, but, what are you looking for, and where would what lines are you looking at to accomplish that?
Yeah. So, even though I lived here in the early 90s, I wasn't doing any cross country. So it's all kind of new to me, from the Monroe is a really great, as really great spot. You can go in quite a few directions from there. Just running along the Wasatch. So over the Wasatch Range, again, for people that don't know, is kind of a lovely long north-south, with 10, 11, up to 12,000 foot mountains. So kind of really running that range. Also, on the border of Wyoming, there's Randolph, where you can launch, go over the back, and then you just get right into the nice windy plains, do some miles there. I'm kind of more interested in running mountains than the flats, or at least a combination of the two. We have a site called over by Park City called Heber that has been closed, but I'm gonna see if I can open it again, because it's east facing, so you can launch in the morning, get the morning thermals, so you can launch earlier, and then when the westerlies kick in, you can ride those, and that's kind of the lines I'm looking at. I don't know if was that the question, or? Yeah.
And what are you flying? What will you be flying for the record?
Yeah. So I'm actually, so I really like the idea of having a tail. So there's Aeros makes a Combat, which has a tail on it. And it's the only high performance glider that I'm aware of that actually formally, it's certified with a tail and all of that. And I think I've been thinking over the years that there's a reason why there aren't any, that I know of, any birds without tails. And when you're flying big desert mountain air, sometimes you hit some pretty rough stuff and people do tumble. And I just like the reassurance of that. So the combat, I like the tail, and it's actually it's the smallest glider. It's the best performing little glider. I don't weigh very much. And I've always had a hard time finding a glider that fits me properly, but performs well. The larger gliders always perform better. And this particular glider, the Combat 12.7 is the size, but it's probably the best sort of blend for me and my weight as far as getting the best performance for the proper size. And again, that tail's great. It's very reassuring when you're shooting up at 2,000 feet a minute and you go over the edge. It's like, there's that tail. Okay, thank you. But yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned Randolph. I don't know if you ever saw that film we did quite a few years back called 500 Miles to Nowhere. And that was a stop. It was called 500 Miles to Nowhere because we never got anywhere. We started down at Hurricane, and the plan was to bivvy to Jackson, just connect it and connect it in the air. So we, like I did with Will and the Rockies, that was wherever we ended was where we started the next day. We weren't connecting it on foot, And so, but the weather was terrible and it OD'd every day, and it was a very late monsoon season. But one of the places we flew was Randolph. And so those of you listening don't know this area is north of Salt Lake, kind of midway between, isn't it? But it's a big ridge, big, beautiful river down below it. And, I always thought it was just a ridge soaring site, but you're saying you could get up there and ping off into the desert.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. Just an option I'm looking at. Yeah. Playing around. I love the idea of Hurricane and Hurricane. I think is how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
And just running north as far as you can. I mean, that's certainly something else I would love to explore as well. But you get into Wyoming had the foot launch world record for many years, actually, because you just get these consistent westerlies that just, fairly strong, but it's pretty flat. So, it's not too you can find quite strong wind, but not worrying about rotor and things like that. And so when you get over the Wyoming plains, you can often just make miles. You can go pretty far, pretty fast. And so I think connecting the dots from, the mountains into the Wyoming flats could potentially, you could get some pretty good miles that way, I think.
I was down at Tacima in Brazil. When was that? In 2017, maybe. And they had just broken the foot launch record the year before. Raphael and all those guys, and they from Tacima, and there were hang gliders there too, going forward as well. Is that still where the foot launch record is for hang gliding?
I actually haven't kept track, so I don't know, but the Wyoming one I'm pretty sure was broken quite a while ago. The hang gliding foot launch record from Wyoming. I'm pretty sure that I think it was even broken in Australia. It was last I heard. I think it might have been Johnny Duran in Queensland, Australia. I'm pretty sure got the foot launch record.
Oh wow!
But that was quite a few years ago, so I haven't kept up. I'm not sure where the latest one is.
Right.
But I know I haven't been there, but I know the Brazil side you're talking about. I wouldn't be surprised if because it sounds like such great conditions. It is
really, really, really tricky start though.
The
big stuff that they've been doing since then has been towing, and they're actually. I'm pretty sure the Brazilian record now is it's now in Texas for us for paragliding. It's in Texas, but for a long time Brazil had it forever, and I think they beat the foot launch record by towing in Tacima. So they towed in front of that hill, which just gave them just easier because foot launching from there, I think for the hang gliders was reasonable. For us, it wasn't very reasonable. It was pretty spicy and pretty wild. And then, it's really early in the morning. You can't get high and you got to fly 40K really low over this kind of escarpment before it drops away. So the way more reasonable flying in Brazil is all being done west of that, and they're towing in Keiko and other places. So your first moves aren't death defying. But then the problem with that is you run into the Amazon quicker, so that you're not going to get the 600K that they have in Texas now.
Right.
Is Johnny's and Dustin, is that still the record in hang gliding?
As far as I
Texas?
know, yeah. So that's so not foot launch. That'll be a tow record done in Texas. Yeah. So
and they still have that.
And they do keep the foot launch and tow record separately. And again, as far as I know, I kind of got out of looking at that stuff for a few years, but as far as I know, they still have it. Yeah. And that's, I can't remember the exact mileage. They're getting up to like 450 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You know, your neighbor Cody has had the foot launch record for a brief second. I might have my time screwed. I can't remember. The guy that's done it down in Texas did it both. He got the foot launch and then he got the tow one both in Texas. But Cody had it for a while flying, I believe it was from Lab. You know, one of your sites there in Wyoming out over the, you know, you follow is that the 80, 86? You follow the freeway.
Yeah, 80.
East.
Yeah.
But there you always get that northerly flow that, you know, late in the day it starts bending. It's hard to kind of keep going straight.
Right. Kind of stops you. Yeah. Stops you track. So that's paragliding.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. And he went for, I don't know, 430 or 440K.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah. 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 And then, you know, that's, I guess the fun thing about that, it doesn't have the same intensity like we talked about earlier with competition flying. You know, you're just really comparing. You know, sure you might be comparing to old records, but you're really just competing with yourself, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, it doesn't have the psychological intensity of that you get in an actual, you know, full on competition. But on the other hand, you don't have the companionship so much. Although you can get your buddies out to try to set the record together, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something about that too, isn't it? I mean, I think your odds go immeasurably up when you're flying with others, right? Because
that's right.
You're flying faster. There's no way you can fly as fast by yourself as you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it depends. If you have good clouds,
sure.
I mean, if you have really reliable clouds, and then you can usually come pretty close. But yeah, if it's a blue day, then absolutely, you know, having each other to mark for the thermals and find the cores quickly and all of that, it's going to be a lot faster.
Here's something with hang gliding. We talk about this all the time. So most of the time in the West, we're flying downwind, right? We're going downwind, especially for the foot launch record stuff. You know, Harrison Valley and the Wasatch, these places, it's typically west, and we're typically going east, and we're flying downwind. But when we're flying going for the records, or just flying XC, just in general, I use my speed bar a lot less than when I'm racing. I mean, we all know that we could go a lot faster if we were racing. You know, if there was 20 of us in the sky and we were really trying to belt one out. It's interesting, isn't it? Is it the same in hang gliding? Are you pulling the rope as much when you're just flying by yourself?
Yeah, I'm just kind of reflecting on that. Probably not quite as much, right? I mean, in general, you do tend to push yourself harder in lots of ways, whether it's, you know, pulling that rope a little tighter, which makes the hang glider harder to handle. And also feel a little bit less stable, you know, with the pitch and stuff. When you pull that rope further, and when you're in a comp, you tend to push it a little further than you probably would comfortably do it otherwise. That's right. And you do tend to find yourself going into terrain where the landing's not as good as you might, you know, ideally like to go into, or getting a little too close to that QNIM, or, you know, so you do get enticed into things in competition that you wouldn't if you weren't in a comp. Absolutely. I think most of us would agree on that. And that's one of the risks of competition, is you can get enticed to behaviors that are, you know, are more risky. You know, you're enticed to push it a bit further than you normally would. Something to keep an eye on.
One more question for you, Paris. If you could rewind the clock to your, I guess, 14-year-old self, somewhere in there, 50 hours. 50 hours.
Okay,
14 to 18 somewhere?
17, 18, yeah.
17, 18, okay. What advice would you give yourself now? You're 52 now, but you get to go back and talk to that kid.
Like flying related advice, or any advice?
No. How about anything? Let's do both.
Okay. I would actually just say, good job, kid. Keep it up. Like keep following your bliss. You know, because that was one thing I somehow had in the midst of, like I was saying, there's a lot of darkness in my life at the time, was I somehow I had this trust that if I just keep following what really lit me up, like what really I was passionate about, that, you know, I would enjoy life. It would work out somehow. And it did. So I would actually, it's kind of interesting as I go back, I would say, just keep it up. This is it, keep following your bliss. Don't lose sight of your passion. Passion might change from time to time, and just keep, staying attuned to that and following that, and it'll work out.
That goes both ways. That's for flying and for life.
Absolutely, both. Exactly. follow your bliss.
That's an easy answer.
That's right. Yeah, because it's easy to lose sight. It's the key word there is your bliss. You can still get pulled by maybe well-meaning parents or society or whatever. To follow a direction. It's not actually like your own spirit calling you in that direction, but you feel like, I really should do this because that's what my family wants or that's what society wants. Drop that. What do you want? What lights you up? And so I think that's the key word in that phrase, follow your bliss. And that is one thing I somehow managed to, I think I had a few mentors in the midst of some of those storms in my life that, encouraged that for me, which was great. So that was, I think in hindsight, that was like the best advice. And I'm really glad I did that.
Paris, thank you, man. That was a real treat. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I hope I get to join you, maybe breaking records or doing some cool flying, and I'd love to go fly a paraglider with you. I don't have the skills to keep up with you on a hang glider, but one of these days I hope our paths cross.
Yeah, likewise. I'll have to work on the paragliding skills a little more so I can try to keep up with you. But yeah, a lot of fun, Gavin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Paris.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.